So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand atheist and agnostic as well as many types.
Hi, Preston.
Hi, Kate.
Do you know what I love?
What do you love?
Scandal and gossip.
Ooh. If you could get any sort of documents, secret documents from the Vatican,
Oh.
well, what sort of documents would you be after?
I remember watching a documentary before, and they have some, I don't know, library. I want to say like a crypt, but that's the wrong word.
Archive?
That's a great word. And it's like super secret documents. I don't remember what I heard they were about, but those really intrigued me. I don't know. I always want to hear about the scandals. I'm sure they know like a lot of shit that we, like even stuff on like, they probably know which relics aren't real.
I would hope so.
You know, because there's like 5 heads of John the Baptist.
See, that sort of thing, I think that they're happy to not clarify because they can't be sure that any of them are real.
Right, but I'm sure they know which ones are fake, and I'm sure there's some documentation on.
Maybe.
Even if they can't confirm they're real, I'm sure they know which ones aren't real. You know what I mean? There might be 2 or 3 of the heads that they're like, this could be it, but I'm sure there's 4 or 5 that they're like, definitely not.
Yeah, that's probably a list like that.
Yeah.
Good old John the Hydra.
Yeah, or like the Shroud of Turin we know is a fake. So they must have some documentation on like, but it makes us X million dollars a year in tourism, so we're gonna...
That's definitely being tracked, for sure.
Yeah. That's what I'd want to know.
Okay. I often hear people speculate about alternative gospels that are buried because they're contrary to the canon. And there's loads of those already out available for the public. And Europeans have this long-standing tradition of just burning stuff they don't want people to have.
It's true.
Unless there's a reason to keep it. And I don't think there's a whole lot of secret gospels in the archives.
I think you're right.
There will be lots of letters from early writers, whatnot, but I don't think there's any secret gospels.
There might be like hot takes on that they don't like.
Oh, probably,
gospels.
Yeah. That seems
reasonable. I'm sure there's lots of stuff that's...
Yeah.
Even things like illegitimate children from priests, they probably have a record of. Like,
who
they
for
have to
sure.
finance. Like, that stuff would all be interesting.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
Today on the Holy Watermelon Podcast,
we started going down a rabbit hole.
We're going to talk about the Vati-Leaks.
Vati-Leaks. This is like over a decade old, but
it is
still interesting. And I think still relevant because one of the things I learned is that there's basically always a scandal, but Vati-Leaks was an interesting scandal. And I think it's one of those things that people should not stop questioning.
Sure.
So,
especially, the biggest single organization on the planet.
Yeah, the fact that a church is its own country is something we need to,
Yeah, with people all around the planet, numbering more than 1 billion, giving them their money. Yeah, there should be some more transparency here.
Yeah.
So, leaking some of this information may have caused some problems for people. We're going to look at that.
Yeah. So it started in January 2012 and sort of progressed for that entire year and into 2013 when Pope Francis took over, which we'll get to. It started with GianLuigi Nuzzi, who is an Italian journalist, and he received intel from Paolo Gabriele, the Pope's butler.
The butler did it.
The butler did it.
I love it.
In the chambers with the letter opener.
I don't think he even needed a letter opener. He just had access to all these documents.
Yeah, right.
He actually had his own desk right next to the Pope's secretary, which is just wild. Why would a butler need a desk next to the secretary?
Why would a butler need a desk at all? But
right? I don't know. I watched enough Fresh Prince. I don't see a need for a butler to have his own desk.
I watched enough Downton Abbey that I agree.
Two very different worlds for butlers.
Right. So it started with a letter from Archbishop Vigano complaining to the Pope about construction projects charging too much. There was padding on these contracts, which means someone somewhere in the Vatican was getting a kickback.
Right. And so that was some good news. And by good news, I mean bad news for some people, interesting news for others.
Yeah, so like for Vigano, who was a whistleblower, he was just fired and sent to the U.S. Oops.
Well, not like fired.
Yeah.
Just relocated.
Yeah, but he was a high. Yeah, I mean, going from an archbishop.
Yeah.
To in Rome to someone in the U.S. is a demotion.
Yeah. Being removed from the capital is a bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
So the spokesman for the Vatican, Federico Lombardi, was upset about classified documents being released to the media. Not what the content was, just that documents were being released. And he coined the term Vati-Leaks.
I mean, that's kind of fair. Any government wouldn't want their confidential documents leaked to the public.
Right.
But some things people deserve to know.
Right. So this Lombardi fella stopped being the head of Vatican TV about the same time the Pope resigned. Spoilers, at the end of all this, the Pope resigns. He didn't actually fully resign from the press office until a few years later in 2016, though.
Yeah. So because of Vati-Leaks, Pope Benedict XVI created an investigative committee to find out where the leaks were coming from. Yeah, it was a group of 3 guys.
Yeah, and they tracked it down to eventually the butler.
Paolo
Gabriele.
Yeah. And the media journalist correspondent, Nuzzi, he wrote a book called His Holiness, The Secret Papers of Benedict XVI, which kind of was the initial incident for the big press coverage.
Yeah, this precipitated all of the big business. The book came out in 2012 and came out in May of 2012. And it had 100 confidential documents right from the Pope's desk, outlining the Pope's personal finances, including bribes. Lots of bribes just to get time with the Pope.
I believe that, yeah. Busy guy.
Sure. But just scheduling time should be a simple business, but secretaries and other people are like, well, I don't have a whole lot of time. I'd have to cancel somebody's appointment if you think you're so important. And if you think you're so important, money.
Yeah.
There was also fighting between factions in the Vatican and also actual death threats.
Towards the Pope himself, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and probably others. I would bet there were others.
I'm sure. So Vati-Leaks, there were a lot of things that were really bad for Pope Benedict. So let's talk about it some more.
So Pope Benedict used to be fairly liberal. He was one of the fellas that advocated for changes. He was seen as a reformer during the Second Vatican Council.
That was in the 50s, right?
60s.
60s. So he's old. Yeah. I mean, he's dead now. But that's one thing I think we forget is how old popes actually are.
Right.
It takes a long time to become a pope. So.
Yeah. But he did get more conservative as he approached the opportunity to be made a cardinal. He insists that his theology never changed. It's just everything else. Like, to the point that he ended his career, he was still advocating for the same things that he advocated for in the Vatican Council of 60 years ago. It's just a lot of other things where he got more old man grumpy conservative.
Fair.
And so Joseph Ratzinger was pope from 2005 to 2013. Before he was pope, good old Joe caused the move of power to discipline sex abuse away from the individual diocese, brought that power to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which feels like a weird title for we need to make sure that priests aren't diddling kids.
Right.
Bringing all these problems under the responsibility of the Vatican. He did that in 2001. And so all the trouble since then has gone through the Vatican rather than swept under the rug locally.
I guess that's good, but I don't know if the Vatican's doing anything more about it than they did locally.
I mean, we've talked about this before in a previous episode. They just keep moving keep moving priests around. The Pope moves around too, but that's
not
for different reasons.
Yeah, I hope.
Yeah.
Ratzinger hoped to fight HIV and AIDS, but also doesn't like condoms. The Catholic Church in general doesn't like any sort of contraceptives.
Yeah. He wrote a thing a little while ago. I feel like it was actually pretty close to the Vati-Leaks incident time-wise. Maybe my timeline's a little fuzzy. That he was talking about how male prostitutes already committing sin were committing a lesser sin by wearing condoms if they were infected with AIDS. Well, it's the whole thing is such a weird thing to have a pope talk about, and
I mean,
it's
guess
all
it makes
still
sense.
frowned upon. The whole thing.
Well, I guess it makes sense that it's a lesser sin to protect another person, but
yeah,
it does feel very silly,
right? Anyway, so during his tenure as pope, Benedict XVI canonized 45 saints.
That's a lot. I think including Mother Teresa, or was that one of John Paul's
That was JP2.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, now that I say it out loud.
Yeah. Because remember, they fast-tracked her and she died
right
during JP2's time. So the cost to the church to canonize a saint is just huge. There's an investigation that has to be done. Right. They talked to all the people.
Devil's advocate, talked about this before.
Yeah. This is allegedly about €500,000 per candidate. There's people get rejected for canonization. So I couldn't find stats on how many were rejected, but that's about €23 million for the ones that made it through during his tenure.
And he wasn't pope for very long. He was pope for, what is that?
8
years?
Yeah.
That's a lot of people to canonize and a lot of money to spend.
Yeah. Yeah, huge business. And so it makes sense that there are some people who don't feel great about that too.
I wonder how many Francis has done since 2013. That's over a decade. I wonder if he's done that many.
926.
Some of those must be dead people. And I can't imagine dead people cost as much as living people.
You can't canonize a living person.
Oh, right. I meant like old, like Thomas More.
Like anciently old.
Where their family's not going to show up for them because...
Right. So mostly Francis's canonizations are fairly recent people. He has canonized a couple of people from the 1700s, and Margherita della Metola was beatified in 1609.
And it took her that long to...
And it took another 400 years to get canonized.
Wow.
So yeah, if it's €500,000 to investigate a candidate for canonization, and Pope Francis has already canonized 926 people.
I wonder if he's made the process cheaper, though. I don't know.
Carlo Acutis and Pier Giorgio Frassati were canonized November 13th of this year.
I wonder if Paolo will get canonized.
Not likely.
You don't think so? I feel like he's done something for the church.
He's done something for the church. Getting a pope to resign, I don't think, is usually the sort of thing that gets you canonized.
So Paolo Gabriele was, as we mentioned, Pope Benedict XVI, private butler, and he started in 2007, so 2 years after Francis. Benedict became the pope.
Yeah, so he got to be the butler for about 5 years before ending his career in the most dramatic way possible.
You know what? Good on him. I'm living for it. So he gave papers to reporter GianLuigi Nuzzi, as we mentioned, to expose the corruption in the Catholic Church that he believed Pope Benedict wasn't aware of.
He's going through the Pope's personal papers. I feel like the Pope knows.
And he tried to pull a Martin Luther.
Kind of. He had hoped that by the public knowing about the corruption within, this would help the church get back on track. And, things have changed, so maybe mission accomplished?
Yeah,
So, Gabriele would meet with Nuzzi and transfer documents in all kinds of really great, sneaky spy ways. He would tape documents inside his jacket or put thumb drives sewn up into his neckties. I love that one.
I do too. Also, and I know this probably isn't a thing in Italy, but I love that a journalist's name is Nuzzi.
Sure.
It's not spelled the same. For our listeners, it's Nuzzi, but it sounds like Newsy.
It could be Nuzzi.
Yeah, probably is.
It's close enough, and I kind of like Newsy.
And these were the 100 documents used to write his book, which I actually want to read.
Sure. I don't know if it's going to be
super
crazy interesting, but maybe.
If there's some commentary on it, it might be. If it's just like reading his papers, that might be kind of boring.
Legal documents can be really dry, but
the gays are rioting again. That's probably what it says.
Maybe. I feel like this would likely have more of an editorial flavor than legal documents.
Yeah, hopefully. So what was in these documents that was so scandalous?
Apart from the evidence of death threats and stuff that we mentioned earlier, it was a lot of it was targeted at one archbishop, cardinal,
who was second in command. So Paolo Gabriele, we should clarify, was arrested.
Yeah, for sure.
But the interesting thing is that the leaks continued after his arrest. So they realized that this problem was bigger than just one butler.
Well, so we know that things were getting published after he was arrested.
That's true.
We don't know for sure that there were other leakers.
There was another person who was dismissed from his job, which we'll get to, which they believe he leaked.
Yeah.
So the main goal of the leaks was to discredit Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. Cardinal Bertone was the Secretary of State, and so this is the second most powerful position in the Vatican. I actually saw one article describe him as the Prime Minister of Vatican City.
Okay.
And he was accused of mismanaging funds and cronyism.
From what I've seen, that feels like the right label.
Yeah, so he was actually the one who was padding these construction contracts. So,
Sure.
He was the one getting the kickbacks. Or his friends were, because cronyism.
Yeah, his friends were getting more money. Fair.
Yeah, so some believe that he was vying to control the papal conclave with Benedict's health failing. So if Benedict died, then he would run the papal conclave to elect the next pope.
And maybe become the next pope.
Yes.
That's always the dream, right?
Well, yeah, for second in command. That one's boring. But that's a kingmaker. Have you read Game of Thrones?
No.
It's called Kingmakers.
Okay. Cool. It's good to be the man behind the curtain.
Exactly.
So, there we are. So Archbishop Carlo Mario Vigano. Archbishop Carlo Mario Vigano wrote a letter to Pope Benedict warning about corruption within the Vatican finances, specifically millions of dollars in padded contractor work. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot.
One accusation has an overpayment of 350,000 euros for a nativity model. One of those little Christmas barn creches.
Wow.
Yeah. So art is the best medium for money laundering.
100%, because
art can cost anything.
It's subjective, yeah. Art is whatever someone's willing to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And so this is one of those things that was brought up as, hey, this is suspicious.
Yeah, and I guess something like a nativity model is sort of and I don't know what scope of, was it tiny or was it huge?
It doesn't. For 350,000 euros, does it matter how big it was?
Well, they say contractor work, right? So there's sort of a gray area between like, I'm building you a house and then I'm decorating it so ostentatiously that now it's worth 3 times what it costs to build. Do you know what I mean?
This was a portable model.
Yeah.
It wasn't a house.
Right,
it wasn't a scene of a play.
Right. Okay. So then, that is problematic.
Yeah. And Bertone had Vigano removed from his post, transferred to the United States. I feel like we mentioned that before.
Yeah, that was sort of in our brief
important highlight. This dude sent far away to get him to shut up. Did it work? Probably not.
Bertone also falsely accused an editor of a Catholic newspaper of having a homosexual affair, which forced the editor to have to resign.
You know, I don't know if I would quit my job if it wasn't true.
Well, and we'll get to some of that it could have been true, but I don't know if it's the right-hand man of the Pope, you might not have a choice.
Yeah, there's a lot of clout.
There's a power there that if he says you're gay, then you're gay, whether you are or not, you know?
Well, and as a priest, it's somebody who is sworn to celibacy and chastity, two different things. Chastity is the one with no sex at all. Celibacy is the no getting married, and by law should also therefore not have sex. Yeah, if you get accused of being gay, well, it's not like you've been caught out with women, so you've got no defense.
Yeah. Bertone redirected tens of millions of euros away from a foundation built to support a hospital to renovate his already opulent apartment.
I can't imagine having an apartment in which I can justify $1 million in expenditures. That's so much money.
Right? Well, euros, I guess.
Yeah, euro dollars. They're still
euro dollars are still dollars. Yeah, like, I think I could spend a lot of money on the house I'm in right now to, like, refurnish it and renovate it. But, like, if I had $1 million, I would just move.
Right.
You know?
Well, so Vatican real estate's really quite limited.
Right. Yeah.
And your apartment is assigned to you.
Right.
But what you do with it is ultimately up to you. I was reading an article, I don't remember which magazine it was in now, that in addition to this nonsense, Bertone also waited for one of his neighbors to just disappear to the hospital for a little while with some health stuff. And he just knocked down a wall into his neighbor's apartment.
I shouldn't laugh, but you gotta appreciate the cojones.
Right? And so eventually, his neighbor gets home from the hospital, notices when he gets into his apartment,
living with Bertone.
This is not how I left it. And he died really shortly after that and didn't actually get to kick up a big enough stink.
And so Bertone just got a double wide apartment.
Yeah.
Wild. In a country. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a country. I don't know why I'm using air quotes, but it's really small. No one can see. Air quotes, no one can see. It's really small in a country with very limited real estate.
Yeah.
Wild. Like the most limited country for real estate in the world.
Yeah. The very strict land borders. You've got a city around you. You cannot expand anywhere but up.
Yeah.
Unless you want to knock over your neighbor's wall, which apparently gets to happen when you're super rich.
Another thing that falls under, I guess, the vow of poverty is helicopter flights.
Oh, yeah. Wild guy. Could not handle having a driver drive him around the city while he breathes
Rome, to be clear,
or
not Vatican City.
Yeah. I mean, he also got driven around Vatican,
I don't think you need to. You don't need to drive around Vatican.
I mean, it's a long walk when you're old.
Man. I guess so.
But yeah, Rome was the problem. It was too big. You'd get noticed for flying around the Vatican real quick.
Yeah, so we got helicopter flights around Rome, so he didn't have to deal with Romans.
Yeah. It's so gross. Anyway, yeah, people were a lot more concerned with the existence of the leaks than with their content. People were just angry that there was this lack of fidelity, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it does feel weird. I mean, I understand that governments don't want their private documents leaked, but it is weird to me that people were more upset with Paolo for releasing the documents than, again, for, like, what the documents unveiled.
Yeah.
Like, the investigation shouldn't have been well, I mean, obviously he needs some sort of disciplining. But it also should have been like, let's do an inquiry into Bertone and see what comes up.
Right. We have whistleblower protection laws here, but I don't know that they're really enough. people are still dying for blowing the whistle on Boeing.
Right.
And Boeing is just like, yeah, that happens. Excuse me?
Horrifying. Yay, labor laws.
Yeah.
There's always been scandals and gossip and bureaucracy and corruption in the Vatican, but what makes Vati-Leaks particularly interesting and unique is that it was an organized plan to disseminate information with the goal of discrediting or removing Cardinal Bertone. Like, there was an actual, like...
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, I mean, I was reading stuff on... When we get into some of the gay priest stuff, it's like there's records of gay priests back to the 900s. The 900s. So there's always been, like...
Well, there's always been gay priests. It's weird that we still have record that far back. Like, it was important to keep those records. I mean, I can see the argument today on why we should have them, because it's good to validate a history of lived experience that exists today. It's weird that they did keep it when that was the sort of thing you want to sweep under the rug.
Yeah. But yeah, so like, but my point is that the scandal isn't that there are gay priests. The scandal is that they released these documents to bring someone down.
Right.
Because, yeah, that's old news. That's real old news. That's 1,100-year-old news. I can't even think of older news than that.
Jesus.
Old news.
Siddhartha Gautama, older news.
Boudica, old news. And new news.
Right.
Dear listeners, I got a dog named for Boudica after the 1st century warrior queen.
So in addition to Paolo Gabriele's arrest, the president of the Vatican Bank, Ettore Gotti Tedeschi, was removed from his position. Bertone discouraged Tedeschi from being financially transparent, and Tedeschi was accused of also leaking documents. Nice and dramatic.
Right. But, I mean, his punishment was just the removal of his job, which, I mean, I guess being president of the Vatican Bank is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
People get to be the president of a national bank.
It's wild to call it that, but that's basically what it was.
I know.
No, it's not.
Also,
in a legal way, it's not quite what it was, but practically speaking, it's totally what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like the priests go and get their special euros from the special ATMs. They just get euros from Roman banks. But they are a nation, so they do things on a
don't report to other nations.
Well, yeah, in a foreign relations, foreign policy scale. Anyway.
Yeah. So the results of the Pope's internal investigation were only allowed to be seen by the investigators and the Pope himself. That makes sense. Don't publish everything to everybody when you're doing an investigation.
Except the investigators were allowed to discuss the findings with the 2013 Papal Conclave. So this is after Benedict has resigned and they're looking for the new Pope, which makes sense. But now everybody, all the cardinals know your business.
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't a long time between popes. They probably shouldn't have opened it up to the conclave. Right?
No, it feels like it makes sense for it to be like, everyone would have known Vati-Leaks happened. There wouldn't be a cardinal that didn't know about it.
Right.
So it's not like you're going into a job blind. You know that there's strife.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to be like, here's the specific strife. It's like, just know if you want to take this job and we're putting you on the voting ballot or whatever, there's strife.
Right. But if it's supposed to be a really small group of people, the investigators, and the dude who gave them the job, I feel like you can go the few days between popes without having them report to the boss.
Yeah, I just mean like, does the new pope or the voting process is still quite secretive.
Oh yeah.
Do you put your name forward, and do you want to know what you're getting into if you're putting your name forward?
I feel like they know what they're getting into.
But I mean, with Vati-Leaks, they wouldn't have known the full scope.
they might not have had all of the details. I think they would have had enough.
They eventually got all the details.
Yeah.
But that's what my point is. Like, did they need all the details to go through the voting process? It's probably what they were thinking. It's like,
Maybe.
we'll let everyone know so they can make the right decision.
Maybe.
The investigation, in addition to the financial discrepancies, also turned up reports of homosexual sex and blackmail within the Vatican as well. Oh, shocking.
Right. Yeah. A leaked conversation with Pope Francis in 2013 confirmed the existence of corruption and the gay network.
So I was reading a bunch of articles and they called it the gay lobby.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of the direct translation from Italian, but it's not a lobby like we have in North America where you're lobbying for farmers or tobacco or whatever. And they said a better meaning is network.
Sure.
So it's sort of an underground network of gay priests.
Who could turn into lobbyists if given the right push.
So the problem with the homosexual priests is not that they're gay. We don't judge that here.
They sure do in the Vatican.
They sure do in the Vatican. It becomes a source of this weird, like, bureaucracy blackmail, because the gay priests know who each other are, and so they use that to leverage their position, and they use it for blackmail. So
if you're trying to get away with stuff, stop having sex with the other priests.
Right. It's estimated, this is a huge estimate. Obviously, there's no formal record on this.
Yeah, some people lowball, some people highball.
Yeah, so it's estimated that somewhere between 20 to 60% of priests are gay. And to be clear, priests act or don't act on their homosexuality in a variety of ways. Some are just gay and they took the cloth and so they could live a celibate and chaste life.
Yeah.
And some are having grinder parties in Rome.
Yeah.
Some
people are having a real hard time with these covenants.
Some of them are just sucking all the dicks.
And to be fair, in the Vatican, there's a lot of dicks.
There's a lot of dicks to suck. So if you are one of the dick suckers, people would have more blackmail leverage on you, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, that's what has come up in the report.
Yeah. So while the Vatican keeps their lips sealed on this sort of indiscretion publicly, it is believed that the gay priests are, causing all kinds of problems.
Not because they're gay, because they're blackmailing each other.
I mean, officially for the church, the gay thing is a problem.
Right, but not for holy watermelon.
Right.
It's not a problem here for holy watermelon. And it's just like, they don't care if you're straight as long as you don't act on it.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Officially, priests are supposed to be asexual.
Yes.
That is the law.
Yeah. So.
And an awful lot of them struggle with that.
We touched on there was the investigators, but then Paolo was arrested, so there was a trial.
Yeah. In May of 2012, Vatican police got a warrant to raid Paolo's apartment, where they found a whole bunch of letters he wasn't supposed to have, including encrypted documents that had been marked for destruction. Like, this message will self-destruct in 10 seconds kind of business. The Pope is supposed to have these destroyed, and instead Paolo's like, I want to keep them.
The Pope was probably like, Paolo, could you please shred these? And he was like, yes, sir.
Into my pocket.
Into my pocket. I'm miming things on a auditory medium. But yes, I will shred these immediately. You won't even see the waste.
Yeah. So after finding all these documents in Paolo's apartment, he was arrested, and that was the end of his career as Pope's butler. He was indicted for aggravated theft, which I really like as a label for a crime. That, yeah, sure, I did this thing that I wasn't supposed to, but I felt like I had a good reason to do it.
Is that what aggravated means in that context?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, aggravated assault is this dude was badgering me, so I punched him.
Okay.
As opposed to a regular assault where I just
want to
attacked
punch
a
someone.
stranger.
Okay. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Aggravated just always sound like they were mad.
I mean, generally, that's
Yeah.
how we use the word. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, aggravated theft. Is he mad? I guess he was. That's why
He was
to
mad.
shop over it. So the maximum penalty was 8 years for illegal possession of documents of a chief of state. But don't worry, he didn't.
And not because he died. Good news there. We'll get to that later.
The trial was in October of 2012. Gabriel's defense was that he needed to put the Vatican back on track, as we mentioned, by fighting evil and corruption that had been allowed to grow.
Sounds a little like Martin Luther that we referenced earlier. So, let's change just a little something in the church. Except this time it's not indulgences. It's worse. I mean, indulgences are pretty bad too. Maybe. Scale is tricky on this one.
I mean, bribes to see the Pope are kind of indulgences.
Kind of. Except
paying money to get a Pope, get a blessing, get a priest.
I don't even know if everybody who wanted to see the Pope was paying for a blessing. I think they were paying just to have the Pope's ear.
Fair.
Yeah. Trouble.
Which is the same as having God's ear, though.
That's why people are willing to pay so much.
So is that not an indulgence? We're getting to a weird Venn diagram of bribery and money laundering.
Religion and money. If they get too well connected, bad things happen every time.
To protect the image of the church, efforts were made to have Gabriel sound crazy.
Yeah, they had witnesses, air quotes, witnesses, testify that Gabriel suffered from a fragile personality with paranoid tendencies covering profound personal insecurity.
Wow.
Which is an interesting way to describe somebody who's angry about things that are for real happening.
Yeah, this is gaslighting.
Yeah, a little bit.
You're just paranoid that there's blackmail in the church.
You're just crazy. No, bro, I got papers.
I got receipts. Others testified that their evaluation saw no error in his reality and that he was not a danger to anybody.
Apart from the people he was actively attacking.
Right. I remember hearing something. So the Pope came to Canada to apologize to the First Nations for the residential schools.
I mean, it wasn't much of an apology.
Because there's some like weird policy that the church can never be wrong.
Right.
Because it's God's church, it's infallible. So I wonder, like, making him sound crazy is like falls under that.
Maybe? I mean,
it's definitely darker than some nice PR words, but like,
yeah.
If they go, well, the church and the Pope can never be wrong, and then this guy must be crazy. Well, and our friend Vernon even said there was, he was taught, what was it? That the story of Jesus was either like a lunatic. Do you remember him telling us this was one of three things, that either Jesus was crazy or actually the Son of God, or it's not true. And then they like disproved that, like, therefore he has to be the Son of God.
Yeah.
So that's also giving me these vibes.
Sure. Yeah. So 4 days after the trial began, Gabriele was found guilty of theft and sentenced to 1.5 years in the Vatican instead of an Italian prison to prevent him from revealing more secrets, which feels really spooky to me. Generally, you're not held captive by your prosecutor directly. You're sent somewhere else where the prison is actually separate from the prosecutor and the people who put you there. No, he's just held in the Vatican.
Yeah. It's so weird, though, because it is this weird city-state.
Yeah. It's so weird.
Because he was charged, he committed the crime in Vatican City.
But normally when you're sentenced to time in prison in the Vatican, you do go back to Italy.
Yeah.
that was not something they were comfortable with having happen.
Yeah, but I don't even know what you do. Yeah.
I mean, I
Get the United
understand the
Nations
reasoning.
involved.
It's just, like we've talked about all these danger cults lately. This is one of those things that sounds reasonable on the surface, but is definitely a situation that opens itself up to abuse.
No, I agree it's a problem, but again, when you're a closed system on your own, like there's no checks or balances. Like I guess unless the Italian government wanted to intervene or the UN, but even then the UN only does it when it's they don't do internal. It has to affect another country.
Yeah.
Like so there's no one to advocate for him because he committed the crime in the Vatican and he was charged. Like I just don't know how you solve it, even though it is a huge problem. Claudio Schiarpelletti was arrested. Jeez, I'm gonna go to Italian hell. Claudio Schiarpelletti was arrested for helping Gabriele and convicted for obstruction of justice, having given conflicting evidence to prosecutors.
Well, yeah. If you're on the opposite side of law enforcement, why back up the story they've already got? Confuse them by giving them a different story.
I love it. Smoke bomb. He was sentenced to 4 months, but that was reduced to 2 months and 5 years of probation.
You know, let's watch you and keep watching you forever because you caused us a problem. That makes sense. So, Paolo Gabriele was pardoned by the Pope the following Christmas. That's pretty good business.
Yeah.
Lucky him. And he died in 2020 at the age of 54, which is pretty young for an Italian.
I read he had some disease. Or he was sick.
All I could find was, a prolonged illness. And the first thing that came to my mind was, in Europe, people poison each other.
Yeah.
I can't back up that claim that he was poisoned, so I won't make the claim he was poisoned. But the thought came to my mind.
All right.
But it was 2020. It's a long time after the trial. It probably wasn't related to that. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking like 8 years.
Yeah.
After the trial.
He didn't last as long as Benedict did, even though they both lost their job at about the same time.
Right. Yeah, so some suggest that he resigned because of the gay network. It could have been because of Vati-Leaks. There was also pressure because of the child sex abuse stuff.
I feel like we knew about the gay network in the Vatican when I was still in high school.
We've known about it since the 900s.
I mean, like the public.
Oh, right. So, anyway, he had a really bad run between the sex abuse, the Vati-Leaks, money laundering.
2012 was a bad year.
Yeah, it was.
It stressed him out, so he had to quit.
Yeah, so in early 2013, Benedict was the first pope to resign in nearly 600 years.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of digging on the history of popes resigning, and it's a pretty short list of popes that have resigned. The last one to resign before Pope Benedict was in 1415 CE, so almost exactly 600 years, almost exactly. But he was forced to resign. And the next one previous to that was only in office for about 5 months. I think it was July to November in 1294 CE. And he voluntarily resigned to avoid being manipulated by politicians while he was in that office.
Wow, so kind of a good guy.
Yeah, he knew that he couldn't outwit the politicians and that he was being manipulated. So he's like, I can't handle this. I'm out.
Wow.
Yeah. After only 5 months. That's a short papacy.
Could you imagine how much pressure that is to be like, after 5 months, fuck this?
Yeah, let's give this problem to somebody else.
So Benedict said he resigned, or the PR piece was that it was because of his age.
Right.
Which is ridiculous because most popes die in office, as you can tell.
Right.
In 600 years.
I'm getting Danny Glover vibes here. Too old for this shit.
Right. I mean, like any monarch or whatever, you do it till you die, even if you can't run it anymore.
Yeah, you just give the job to other people, usually while retaining the title. Benny didn't feel the need to keep the title.
Yeah, so some sources suggest that he resigned to improve church PR. Again, he had an awful couple years of it.
Yeah.
Because, some of the child sex abuse stuff came out with John Paul II.
Oh, yeah.
But then Benedict was supposed to clean it up, and he really didn't do too much.
Yeah.
To be fair, Francis hasn't done much either. But it's that thing nobody wants to poke at.
Well, and it's hard to fix when you're running out of priests.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it before. An easy fix for that might be let them get married. There's loads of people who would love to be priests, but won't because they also want to have a happy married life.
Well, our good friend Frank McMahon.
Yeah.
Go back, listen to that episode. He's a former priest, and he left because he wanted to get married and have kids.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, just the way he spoke, he probably still would have been a priest.
I think he told us outright he would love to have stayed.
Yeah, he's still very faithful and very involved, and but he loves his wife and kids.
Yeah.
And good for him.
Right? I feel like it's a good trade.
Yeah.
One day, I mean, we've talked about this before. There's no reason for the church to have this rule for celibacy for the priests apart from it saves them some money not supporting the families. It doesn't seem to me to be a very good trade when clearly they can afford it.
They can afford it, and it feels like one of those weird things, like, we talk about like raising the minimum wage will bankrupt businesses, but it won't because now workers have money to spend in businesses.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's one of those things where if you say you can get married, well, now you have more priests, so your parishes are being better served. So you're probably losing fewer Catholics to the world,
right?
Because they have their support in their parish,
mm-hmm.
And potentially even growing parishes.
Well, and people are generally going to have a better time trusting a priest who has a wife and kids than worry. They're not going to want to worry about, is this priest a pedophile? And while many pedophiles are married with kids, I feel like the risk statistically is much lower with a married person than with somebody who's forced into celibacy.
Well, and even from, again, serving your flock perspective, like you hear about priests giving marriage counseling, and it's like, what do you know about marriage? Like, just from a spiritual, emotional health perspective, if you know what it's like.
So some of the advice I've heard from married clergy is, as long as you're both growing towards God, you'll grow closer together.
Sure, I'm not saying
it's
it's
definitely
great
what you're getting from your Catholic priests.
I'm not saying it's great advice, but it would probably be better advice if they were actually married.
Yes. More informed advice.
Or at least just like someone you could take seriously. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
So he, Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, died on New Year's Eve, 2022.
That's so recently.
It is, yeah. It kind of.
I'm sure we posted that news on
we're doing a podcast then, yeah.
Yeah.
So
there are some things that have come out of this that is seeing some lasting change and advancing change. The Vatican Bank, which isn't actually what the institution is, it's the institution for the works of religion, who happens to hold all of the money for all of the organizations that make up the Holy See and the Church and the Vatican. They had to make some big changes. They got a new president right after Benedict resigned. Pope Francis appointed a commission to examine reform in the bank, which is a big deal. And now you can find a whole bunch of cool information about what this Institute for the Works of Religion, the Vatican Bank, is doing. You can find it online.
Nice.
It's publicly visible. They published their first annual report, first ever, in 2013.
After 2,000 years of history?
Approximately, yeah.
All right. That's exciting for them.
So you can even find it on Wikipedia that they made $30 million last year as profit as a bank. That's a lot of money.
It is, especially for something so small.
Right. Yeah. In the first year, about 1,300 account holders were asked to close their accounts because there are rules about who can hold an account in this bank that isn't a bank but is totally a bank. And there's specific groups and kinds of people who can hold accounts. And they found 1,300 people who were like, there's no reason we should be serving you. We're pretty sure that it's fraudulent, most likely, or at best, you just chose the wrong place and you should be doing your banking somewhere else. And so if you have no reason to bank with the Vatican Bank, go bank with an Italian bank.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know this, everyone. We're in the middle of Rome. Like, you could just walk out the doors and there's probably an ATM.
Right?
You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Yeah. One, I don't know if Rome is the same as here for banks, but there's ATMs for all of the different banks. Everywhere.
Yeah. Funny. But
right?
Good for them.
Yeah. So there is good changes because of these Vati-Leaks, as dramatic as they were for a year a little while ago.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we'll see more. I think that's just sort of what people are demanding. And yeah, things will just come to a head.
Yeah.
I hope Francis is doing a good job.
Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah.
But
he's a lot more austere.
He's a lot more comfortable in poverty.
Yeah. Yeah. Priests take a vow of poverty, Sistine Chapels. Again, our friend Frank really liked his vow of poverty too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that should be a thing that they do more. Like, give away that 30 million, maybe.
Right. I mean, a vow of poverty is pretty easy to keep when you just accept that the church owns everything that you get to use, and you get to use a lot of it.
And it's their choice for how opulent it is.
Right.
It's not my fault they give me a 7-course meal every night. I just show up. I didn't pay for it.
Yeah, that's basically how it seems to go.
They just gave me these vestments that are embroidered with real gold. Oops.
Yeah.
Zinger. It's a really bad joke. I apologize.
Well, that's the history of Vati-Leaks.
You know where the Vatican should launder its money?
Through the San Leonatus Fellowship?
Yeah, through our Spreadshirt. And our Patreon.
That would be really great. I don't think anybody at the Vatican needs the holy watermelon to make them into priests. Or wizards, as we have recently decided to go with.
That's a pretty good name, yeah. But yeah, if you want to launder some money,
we could help you out with that.
We could help you out with that. It's art.
Legally speaking, laundering is not the mission. I feel like
legally
that maybe
speaking,
does
no
need to
money
be said out loud.
Will be happening. It's a joke.
But if you wanted to send us money, that would be great.
In return for goods or services.
Yeah. Not for nothing. I mean, if you just wanted to donate, we'd take that too.
We actually do have a tier for that on Patreon.
Yeah.
Just to keep us going.
Yeah. You can also join the conversation on Discord. We're also on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. There's a lot of great ways to engage and enjoy this with us. Thanks for joining us. Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.